Hey, folks, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Embellish Podcast, a podcast focused on product stories, product storytellers, interesting brand ambassadors, and anything else that we happen to come up with. Whether you're a bourbon fan, a geek, a casual observer, or someone just floating through the channel, I hope you find what we have here interesting. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully, I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com, and I'll try to get that taken care of. I also generally live stream the recording of these episodes on YouTube. You can also find all of my links on Instagram at EmbellisPod or Twitter with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place you can pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today is December the 15th, and we are going to be talking with Dixon Dedman of 2XO and a handful of other things. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll say the first thing that I ever tasted as a native Kentuckian that kind of elevated whiskey above what I would normally expect it to be was a double oaked offering. And so whenever I learned about the idea that you were going to be kind of getting into this, I knew that, it's going to be great, and I'm going to have to fight somebody to get a hold of it. And it was exactly that. I ended up having to source it from another state because I did not see it locally here in Western Kentucky, at least not in any volume that could allow me to get there. And so let's dive into, what is 2XO, kind of what was the ethos or the reason of being for 2XO, because you've done like everything. You've climbed the Everest of whiskey or bourbondom. So what brought this one on?
Well, look, man, up front, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for inviting me. Or actually, I begged you. So thank you for accepting me on your show. Really cool. And looking back at who you've talked to and what you talk about, I think it's really interesting. It's not one of those kind of tell me about your brand things. And so, I mean, great job with what you're doing with your podcast. And I really, I really appreciate the opportunity to come talk about, some of the stuff we're doing. Really, when to answer your question, I got to kind of go back a little bit. When my original partner in Kentucky Owl, Mark Carter, and I were kind of talking about the brand, and Mark was saying, well, what is it that you want to accomplish? What is it that you want to do? What is it that and I was young. I was really, I'd been bitten by the bourbon bug. I was into it. I was a collector. I was too far into it. I had to have three of, I don't know why you have to have three of everything, but whatever. I was in that stage where you're collecting things you don't even ever really want to drink. You just have to have it or something. I don't know. So when we were designing, the kind of the program, there were a couple of things that were really important to me. First was to launch I wanted to be barrel proof. I was really into barrel proof and high proof stuff. And I really, I felt like as a new brand and launching a new brand, it was important to, everybody's going to come at you if you release something, with a certain price point and it's 90 proof or something like that. Like, oh, you're just watering it down to sell more bottles or hiding this or what, and so the first thing was, barrel proof, because you can't hide anything in barrel proof. It's all there. You could take something from 125 to 92 and you can cover some flaws there or whatever, but in barrel proof. So that was one of the components. The second component was, I really wanted to follow this path of blending, of taking different distillates and mingling them and find out how they work together and how they, it's weird. It's not always, the three things you like the best independently don't always make the best combination. And so, I wanted to explore that. But further, we were obviously, it's not near as big a deal now as it used to be, but we were an NDP. We were a non-distilling producer. We were sourcing. And the thing that was most, really important to me was never to, and not there's anything wrong with this, but for me personally, it was very important to to put my thumbprint on the liquid that we were going to use. And obviously maturation is certainly one way to change it to a certain extent, but to a greater extent, that's really where I kind of fell in love with taking liquid at a certain point, introducing it to new charred oak barrels, really changing the whole flavor, character, and complexity of these different whiskeys. And you get a lot of interesting components in a shorter amount of time. It allows you to kind of make some changes and beef up some product without having to wait whatever 5, 6, 8 additional years or something. So it was kind of a test in the beginning, like, let's see what this does, where this goes, how it develops. And I really just kind of fell in love with that. I fell in love with the fact that you take something that's that's really nice, and you can put that in a bunch of different barrels with a bunch of different flavor, with a bunch of different char levels. And all of a sudden you've taken one distillate, and from that distillate, you've got 4 or 5 different flavor profiles to work with in the blending process. So it really started, and it's really all about kind of 2 things. One is putting my own stamp on the liquid, and then secondarily, creating this inventory of all these different flavor profiles with which to blend.
Mm-hmm. And I've said it a number of times on this particular podcast, and talking to other people, some friends from, Perry and Eric from This Is My Bourbon podcast or Whiskey Ring podcast, whatever. Like, I think that between blending and barrel finishing, whether it be, double oaking or using wine finishes or whatever, is sort of like the future of bourbon, right? Because, for a long time, we got wrapped up in, single source, single producer, blended whiskey is bad. If you're putting it in a finishing barrel, it's because you're trying to hide some sort of a fault or whatever. And, maybe the Scotch or other parts of the world have kind of gotten past that snobbishness and moved into, like, you can do some kind of really unique and fun and interesting things. And you said it yourself, sometimes if the individual parts, when you put them together, something that is greater than the individual parts, and like,
Sure,
where 1 + 1 becomes 4 instead of 2, because they sort of complement and add into each other.
Well, I think the other thing that we're starting to find, people are starting to find as they open distilleries and do, I mean, to get the traditional or the kind of the bourbon flavor flavor profile that you or I expect and we want, it's a pretty small window for what that mash bill has to be to get what so you go around and look at all the big guys, the small guys too. I mean, their mash bills are not that far removed from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's another part of it, is like, okay, how do we push the needle a little bit? How do we change this profile a little bit? How do we, get something a little bit different going on? And, I think that's a big part of that, is because a lot of what's being made right now is all pretty similar.
Yeah, you get a similar note. You got to do something that's interesting, and you touched on, like, your first venture was an NDP, and I kind of credit what you were doing with that particular project, what the Carters have done with their projects, and kind of taking away some of the stigma that came from NDPs, right? Because in the past, a lot of folks would pick up their source whiskey from somewhere else and do whatever they could with the label to obfuscate where it came from. Nothing illegal. There's certain ways that you can kind of, skirt around letting them know it came from Indiana or it came from Tennessee. But you guys just sort of move forward with, like, no, yeah, we went out and bought this, but we're blending it to kind of create something that was better. And, we get stuck with this mindset that, in the 70s, 80s, blended whiskey was just a way to try to move more product. You're trying to get rid of things or whatever. And it's shifting from that a little bit. But, you kind of worked through that particular venture, and then you eventually sold it. And you seem like the kind of person that has a really deep connection with the work that you're doing. You even indicated that you want to put your thumbprint on things. Is that a hard process, like building something up, selling it, and then stepping away from it? That feels like that would be like emotionally taxing, at least for maybe a person like you.
Probably one of the hardest. I mean, it would be tough for me to come up with a more difficult decision than that one. I mean, I truly thought that was going to be something I would do forever. That was going to be, and then, at some point in your life, you have to take a long, hard look at who you are and what you've created and what you want people to say about you. And, it's important to me anyway, to be able to look my kids in the eye and be proud of what I was, doing, and think that I was respected in the industry, and that I had gained so much trust from our the people who followed our journey. And at some point you have to make a decision, like, can I keep putting my name on something? Do I stay with something as much as it means to me, if I don't believe in the program? And not to say that there's, there's different opinions on the program, and everybody can have a different opinion. I at that point, I made the decision. Never will regret the decision to sell. It was the right thing for the brand at the right time, and it was a phenomenal relationship for a while. And then some changes happened in the company that I partnered with, and they wanted to go in a different direction, and that direction was different than mine. And I got to sleep at night. So
yeah, I mean, and that's fair. And you built a brand, like you created a brand. I mean, maybe create is not the right term, because you sort of revived one, but you created a brand, and then you kind of, go through this process of selling it. But in the process, you also created this other brand, this brand of Dixon Dedman, right? Like now you've got two brands that you're trying to protect. One is a physical brand, and one is the brand of part of your identity. And it feels like, and these are all suppositions that I make from digging around through, and this always feels weird when you're doing like background research on people. It sort of feels like stalking, but from a professional sense, because you're like digging through and reading articles about people. And 30 years ago, I'd probably be on maybe a temporary restraining order, but now you just slap a podcast on it and it's perfectly fine. But you feel like the kind of person that you sold off a brand, but then you stuck with it for 18 months or whatever it was afterwards. You feel like the kind of person, like, you've got to leave the right way. You're going to work the right way. You're going to build the brand, but you're going to leave the right way as well. And you're going to make sure that you're not just kind of like dropping the bag in somebody else's lap and saying, I've made my money, walk off. And that feels like the brand of Dixon. I mean, have you gotten that kind of feedback from other folks?
Well, man, I grew up, in the hospitality business, and and my dad, he told me, a long time ago that you work just as hard on your last day as you do on your first day. And that's what you expect. When somebody walks in and says, I'm giving my 2 weeks notice, I always said, well, I understand. And I wish you, good luck. But a 2 weeks notice means that you give us those 2 weeks. And you never, ever know how things are going to work out, how things are going to, and things follow you, And so it's very important to me to leave any relationship the right way, with respect. And I respect I respect them. There's no ill will. We just were going in different directions. And, and quite frankly, for the first 3.5+ years that I was, after we sold, that I was with Stoli, I had every bit of the creative. I mean, it was like, it's your show, we'll follow you, let's go, we want to support you, and gave me the tools to grow it and advance it. And then some things changed, and that wasn't there anymore. And I respect that. They owned it. They could make those decisions. They just didn't. I just didn't agree with them. So
right. And that's any business. If you're not at the top, you're not in charge. Somebody can change that, and that's it doesn't feel like changes they made were any ill intent towards you either, at least in my perception. But trust and reputation are similar in the fact that you can take a lifetime to build it up and you can destroy it in seconds. And that's sort of what you're protecting your own particular legacy. But so you've worked in hospitality, you build a brand, you sell it, you then move on. Are you a serial entrepreneur? Like, is this a thing for you? Like, you just like the build?
I don't know that I ever like would have said that about myself before. I mean, I think I have that drive, and maybe it sounds bad, like, not to say I get bored with things, but it's like I love a challenge, and I wouldn't say that I got back into this out of exclusively an entrepreneurial spirit as much as it's a really fun business to be in. 2, I'm very passionate about it. 3, I had some phenomenal people who wanted to help me realize kind of this vision I had. And then, I felt like there was, for me in this industry, I felt like there was a lot of meat still on the bone, I guess. I mean, I've invested in some other things. I've, things that I think are fun and that interest me or whatever. I wouldn't say it's like, oh, I'm looking for the next thing all the time. I'm very content with what I have. So I think it wasn't as much about like, oh, I want to start another business and try to, it was like, man, I had a lot of fun doing that. And I think the vision that I had and my team have for what we're doing with 2XO, there's a lot, we can just have a lot of fun doing it.
So 2XO, the first blend of that is out. I would suspect that there's not a ton of bottles left on the shelves anywhere. They probably went pretty fast, or at least that was my sort of perception. But it's called the Phoenix Blend, right? Did you derive the name, or did somebody else come up with the name of Phoenix?
Well, one of the things I wanted to do with this brand was to, and that's really where I get a lot of my joy, is the blending process and creating these kind of one-off unique blends. And so this is actually kind of the middle tier of the program that is 2XO is this, and the Phoenix blend is the first in that tier. We're calling it the Icon series. And the idea is that instead of a batch 1, batch 2, batch 3, batch 4, I got to go find that little number on the bottom of the label somewhere. That really we would create kind of a name, it's kind of like we would name it based on where I was in my life and in my journey. And we would kind of tell a story around that with the bottle, and then create a different icon for each of those. So the second release, which I've actually been working on for the last week and a half, will be called the Innkeeper's Blend. And instead of that Phoenix on the front, it will have a lantern, which is a symbol of hospitality, and that's kind of a tribute to my past in that industry, and kind of so it was kind of an evolution of and at that point it was all like, okay, so what's the first one going to be? And and it's all the new beginning, resurrect, whatever, all those things. And somebody just said, what about if we put the Phoenix blend? I was like, the Phoenix blend. Then I'm sure a lot of people would argue this, but like I like to think of myself as a pretty modest and humble person, and so I was like, I'm not sure I can go around and tell people like, this is my rising from the whatever.
Yeah,
I was like, I don't, but it works. Cool image, looks cool on a bottle. So Yeah, our team, we kind of came. I'm not sure which one of us threw that out there, but yeah, all of that stuff, the kind of brainstorming that goes into that type of thing, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I asked that slightly because I don't know what your team looks like. It may be relatively younger, and I think you and I are similarly aged, and where we can look back as a Phoenix and understand its connection to Greek mythology because you may have had a class or two at some point in time. But there's a generation of people that are starting to work with us in different industries that a Phoenix to them is going to come from Harry Potter.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And so that was my next question was like, is this a Harry Potter Phoenix or is this a Greek mythology Phoenix?
No, there's no Harry Potter reference yet. I mean, if we get really desperate, we might go down that. But I think J.K. Rowling's attorneys are probably tough.
Well, as long as you don't use that
with.
Phoenix's name, she can't say anything because it is Greek mythology, and so you don't get to do that. But so you guys are working on blends, and blends, like I said, I think are a big thing. Is there, that process seems like it's going to be pretty arduous. And I think about whenever you have the greats in the past that might have weird ways of kind of going into a basketball game, football game, they got different rituals. Do you have like a weird thing that you do before you're sitting down to do a blend? Do you like wear certain socks, you put chalk on your hands? Like, you got anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a series of calisthenics, followed by, always a greasy cheat. No, I'm just kidding. I think, it's kind of a zone that you go into, it's not something that, I can't do it at home. I can't do it. I've got this great space now and I used to have one at the end, and it's just kind of like, I don't know music, it's just, you're just kind of processing things. And it's funny too, because a lot of times people will say, I'd love to come up and blend with you for a day. And it's like, well, I know that sounds like something like the way it works, but for me, I'll kind of put something together, taste it, go off and do something for a little bit, come back, taste it again, really spend some time with it, spend some time with the individual elements and see what's coming through and what, if there's something, whatever. And then you kind of make something else and you walk away and you come back to it. And, it's not like, okay, today from 11 until 3, I'm going to sit here and keep pouring stuff into a graduated cylinder until I find that, but it's, I don't bring anybody in on it. I don't have a panel. I don't have, it's just kind of this one little thing that I do. And when I get into it, it's kind of always there. I'm always kind of processing it and thinking about it. And then you just get to that point where you go, oh, that's it.
Mm-hmm. So I got a couple of different things here, so I'm gonna start with one. Like when I taste whiskey, I hate giving notes because I think it's like one of the dumbest things in the world. Because what I taste and what you taste may be different. Like your concept of bananas may be a true banana, might be runts. Like banana runts, which are two different banana flavors. But I do sort of have this rule in my own brain where I've got to taste something 3 times before I decide I don't like it. If I taste the first time I like it, okay, that's fine. I'm going to like it another time later on. But if I taste it once and I don't like it, I taste it the second time, I don't like it, third time, because environmental goes into it and, what my mood is and what time of the day and did I drink other whiskey beforehand. Do you have like kind of a minimum number of times you're going to taste a blend before you're like,
I just keep tasting. I mean, I constantly, and, even if I have one that I don't like, I'll always, especially when we start doing blind, I start doing this blind and setting them up and I'm trying to work them in and see if I can always pick out the ones I don't. And, I never get one and say, oh, I got it. That's it. And then, I'll taste it 6, 7, 8 different settings just to make sure that it's there. The other thing that's funny is it doesn't matter. I start with 200 ml blends. So I just make little small things, but you make it today and it's those things, 24 hours of kind of mingling and settling down and chilling out. it's really hard to even evaluate it without, giving it, 24 hours to sit there and kind of, I don't know, mesh or meld or whatever the term is. So, it's kind of an ongoing thing. And I'm like you. Actually the two things that I like the least about working in this industry are 6 a.m. flights and, having to write tasting notes. Like, I despise it. And there's a whole nother story, but I really feel like you can essentially put tasters into 3 categories, so it's a real special person that can actually articulate specific notes and things like that. And I have to really focus to get it done. And even mine are not probably as specific as some people would like, but I work on feel. Like it has to feel right to me. I'm not necessarily concerned if it's a heavier note of caramelized rhubarb or not enough toasted sassafras. I want it to feel right, and it's got to feel balanced. I want to feel it on the front of my palate and move to the back of the palate, back of the palate, and have a little spice. I want it to stay off the sides. I don't want it to be bitter. I don't want it to be acidic. And sometimes it can be heavier in one portion or another, as long as it still has that feeling of balance. But that's really, kind of when I'm building, it's really more on feel, not like I'm not scribbling down honeysuckle, boysenberry,
things that people may have never had, right? And do you mean honeysuckle as a flavor? Do you mean honeysuckle like I'm walking out to the fence row behind my house and I'm actually pulling out the liquid from a honeysuckle itself, right? And not everybody gets that experience. You joke pretty regularly that you're just a hillbilly from Kentucky, and I think it's a bit of a badge, but also a misnomer, because you're a little more than a hillbilly. But I guarantee you've gone out and you've pulled a honeysuckle flower off, you pulled the little stem through, and you've got and that's a different flavor than honeysuckle scent or honeysuckle whatever. And that's the problem. If I'm going to give somebody a note, it's going to try to be as vague and general as possible so they get the idea. I'd rather talk about the emotion that it brings or the memory that it drives up, because
that's my thing. He's talking about all the times. Like, you got people who are just yes, no, good, bad. I like it, I don't like it. And you got people that are they're like, oh, I get dried walnut, I get, whatever. And then, what I love, and my favorite place to connect with people, I was doing the tastings at the end and stuff like that, is when you give somebody something and it immediately takes them to like that very specific memory. Like, it becomes a very personal experience for them. It's like, to your point, you smell something that's very floral, and what does it do? It reminds you of your grandmother's azalea bushes after it rained when you were a kid, or it reminds you of, the cookies that somebody brought on Christmas Eve for you to leave for Santa those kinds of things. Like, that's that super personal experience or whatever. And I love tasting with people that can do that. It's just fun.
Yeah. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and, it can take what might actually not be a great tasting whiskey and move it to a great place in your mind and have a distinct memory. I was with some friends. We were in a cabin in the mountains, and they hand me this whiskey, and it's got this really distinct, in the 80s, when you got a brand new pair of tennis shoes that had leather in them, you open up the box and there's a very distinct smell that kind of comes along with it, and it kind of fills your mouth. And it's not a great taste, but we didn't get a lot of brand new shoes when I was a kid. And so that took me to a place like, I remember this one time, which is a great memory, but a terrible taste. And so now I have this fond place for a whiskey that's maybe not so great, but it was perfect.
I remember the first, it's not the first time I had it, but somebody handed me one time and this is probably 2012, 2013, handed me this Glencairn and said, what do you think about this? And I was like, this is so interesting. This reminds me of the way, the back corner of my parents' garage when I was a kid. It's not bad, but it's kind of musty and, kind of whatever. And of course it was Pappy 23. And I was like, I'll forever link Pappy 23 to the back corner of my parents' garage. And I don't, it was just.
And it stuck there, and it can still be a good memory, even if it's not necessarily.
Sure.
And I even told the person, and they're like, "Did you just tell? Like, I gave you the taste of this whiskey, and you're telling me it tastes like a shoe?" And I'm like, that's not
what I'm saying.
Right. And so you gotta back up and give them the full story, but then it's more impactful. It's more personable. It's I think it's what it is, and like. That's the part that makes like tasting fun, is you're able to kind of share memories. And that's what I think makes brown spirits specifically fun. But as a part of the blending, like you did this tasting, I found this on Instagram where I don't know who you did it for, but you kind of got the parts that made the blend, right? And you take that out. And this is something that I absolutely told Matt and Danny and Mike from Penelope whenever they were on back in the summer. I was like, you need to build a kit where you've got the bottle that you blended, and then you got maybe some little 50 mLs of what you made to blend it, and let people like recreate or taste the parts or whatever, like, because that's a thing that is not out there, but like that's an interesting tasting. Like,
I thought it was fun. It was something that I came up with that we did in some markets with some of the distributors and some of the big powerful retailers that you gotta, and then what it became with a lot of people is an exercise in blending. And when they can look at these 4 different components and say, wow, I really like this third one. The first one's kind of weird. I don't like the second one at all. And then all of a sudden you give them the finished product and you're like, how the hell does that happen? And it's like, it's kind of crazy. And so I actually was invited to do this event down in Georgia. And there was this food paired and everything. And of course, I've only got one product on the market right now. It's not like I can take, so I said, hey, what about if we did this deconstructed tasting for your members? I work with the chef and we pair it with dishes, and they were like, this has to be an ongoing thing. Like this, it's
you've created a monster.
It's probably true, but it's just a really kind of fun. I loved it. I loved going through it and kind of, because I actually get to a point where I'm, you're kind of less focused on the components anymore. You're starting to dial in on how they react, and and you add a little bit of this and take away a little bit of that, and all of a sudden, it goes in this great direction. You're like, okay, we need to follow that. So then to like come back later and deconstruct it is actually a lot of fun.
Yeah. And, and then there's the whole blending on a timeline, right? Like, so I got the wonderful opportunity of being at Whiskey Week in Batch 4. And so you end up on stage and you've got maybe 30 minutes to make a blend, right? And then bring it back out for competition. Like I'm just sitting out in the audience watching, and I thoroughly enjoyed it because I'm like, I know this is a thing you take like a high degree of care and craft over as a part of your profession. And now it's like, hey, sit on stage with these other, 4 or 5 folks and try to come to a center idea.
No, that was fun. And the other problem with that was, I'd only had about 37 things to drink by the time they put us up there on that stage.
that people continually handing you blend cans.
And so, and then, what was funny about that one is it's like, all right, everybody in here has, is well on their way. So let's make something that's really smooth, really easy, so we put this together. It's like, this is great. I was like, I want y'all to put a drop of water in each one of these glasses. We did that, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, this was
controversy.
Yes, and then everybody's like, oh, I didn't know we could add water. It's like, hey, I mean, you got to think outside the box every once in a while,
I was on board with it, and I bought both of the blends. I have yet to crack them open to do the comparison to see if the final decision was legitimate or not. Because at the other end of that, the person who was judging was also in the same place of probably having had 20 or 30 different drinks that night. Like there was no science to that. It was all art and finesse is all.
There is no telling what those taste like, to be honest with you. Like
so we've got just a little bit of time. We're going to probably hit some maybe weirder questions, right? I think I might know the answer to this.
Okay.
But is there anything out there that you enjoy more musically than 90s hip hop?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of like goofy pop music with my kids and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, kind of 90s hip hop is my jam for sure. It like songs come on the way to school, and my kids are just like, oh, here he goes, he's gonna twist the knob off or whatever, and it happens.
The same thing happens in my car as well. And I fully appreciated that as I'm doing I'm like maybe 5 or 10 scrolls deep into the Instagram feed, and I come across like kids jamming out to 90s hip hop. And I'm like, there it is. There's some Biggie Smalls playing. And you're raising your kids right. You're raising your kids right at this point.
It's kind of our little, and actually sometimes when they just start really getting on my nerves in the car on the way to school, I just like go to my phone. I'm like, all right, I'm going to just blow at least I won't be able to hear them,
Yes. Yeah. I've been in those shoes. So the other thing, and this is something that I've seen in the whiskey community, which I'm trying to figure out why there's this correlation here, but are you a fan of visiting Disney prior to having kids? Like, was that a thing that you were interested in doing, or was it a product of having children?
I was not. My wife's family are like, they've probably paid for that daggone castle a few times over. I mean, they're diehards. So, I held off with my wife until we had kids. And then we went, and the whole way down there, I was like, I went once as a kid, but I was going down there. I was like, I'm going to hate this. I'm going to hate this. I'm going to hate this. You get down there, and all of a sudden it's like, you know what? This is not so bad. And all of a sudden, it's 2:00 in the afternoon, and you're watching your kids have a great time or meltdown or whatever, but no one cares because their kids are melting down. And then it's like, oh, we can buy a beer over here. Okay, that's even better. And it's okay. So, we've been, I don't know, I guess we missed 1 year because of COVID, but it's like 6 or 7 in a row for spring break. And it was another one of those things. I thought I'd hate it. And I take a lot from my kids. I really, I love coaching my kids. I love, and it just, whatever, if it brings them joy, I really find joy in it myself, I guess.
Yeah. And it's because you come across it from the guys from the podcast. You come across it from the guys from This Is My Bourbon podcast. They're all like huge Disney fans. And there's this like growing group of people in whiskey tube, whiskey podcasting, whiskey Instagram that are just like huge fans. And I think it kind of pushes back to storytelling and the ability to storytelling. Disney has a capability of doing that better than just about anywhere in the world.
Well, there's pretty good food and drink down there too, which is, surprised me, but I find a majority of the people that are pretty into things like we're into also enjoy good food and good drink. So
yeah. At one point we were probably all chasing down craft beer 20 years ago before whiskey was as big a thing as it is now. But, we're a couple minutes away from you need to be done. You have, and this, I've asked other people that are like whiskey podcasters or whatever, like, you have a podcast and a YouTube channel, right? Like, but like everybody I've asked doesn't know this yet. And I think that it's going to make the rest of us want to quit, because you have a fantastic way of storytelling and communicating with people, and you always have. And now that you're actually pushing into this, like, this may be the last episode for me.
I get credit for that, but I have very little to do with it other than, showing up and logging on for the recordings. I mean, I always wanted to do it. I thought it would be really fun. I found a partner, or, this guy, I was kind of consulting with him, and he said, hey, I've been thinking about doing this. I said, yes, that sounds awesome. I'd love to be a part of it, as long as I have to do nothing but make a fool of myself and in front of and they're like, oh yeah, you'll be great at that. And I was like, thanks, I think. But I mean, it's fun, and it's kind of, we've done the same thing. We brought bringing on people and sharing stories about, what it's like to launch. I mean, that's what we were really trying to do is tell a different story about, the inner workings of creating a brand, developing a brand, the challenges that people don't get, from outside, like distribution, like navigating the TTB, like, working with salespeople, like, all of that kind of stuff. And then I usually just kind of mix in some stupid story about something that happened to me in there too, or whatever. But it's fun. I enjoy it. It's a little bit therapeutic,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so I will absolutely give it credit. In the last 48 hours, I think I've binged 75 to 80% of what you guys have put out on YouTube or within the podcasting app, and so it is great. And I kind of mentioned this off air. You're already leaps and bounds above where most of podcasters are as far as equipment. So kudos to that.
Like I told you, I can connect it. Like I know what's supposed to plug into where.
That's more than some of us can do. So,
that's if you were like, hey, turn down your whatever, I'd be like, yeah, sorry, I don't know where that is. You're going to have
to, we're going to have to FaceTime for that part. I mean, you're going to have to show me the camera and I'll show you where to go with it. I guess the last thing I have, like I said earlier, I think that I think you and I are similarly aged. You're in early 40s. Mm-hmm. I got a good friend of mine, David Levine. He runs Whiskey Rigging Podcast. And he was talking to somebody else, and your name came up in his last episode. And he said he's pretty sure that you're in like a Dorian Gray type situation because you're making the rest of us 42-year-olds look really, really bad, right? Like you're carrying this youth age view. Like, how what are we doing here? What do we need to do different, Dixon?
I think it's all falling apart very quickly here. It may have just, I think it's coming. I'm going to get it at some, but it's on its way.
You're saying you're just 10 years behind us. Like, we did this 10 years ago and you're catching up.
I don't know if I may be pickled at this point. That may be the other thing. It may just be like I'm preserved with as much booze as I've consumed. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, it could be something along that lines. We're at 3:50 or 4:50 your time. You've got some things to take care of. I appreciate you for joining me. I think we got through maybe 30% of my questions, so we'll have to do this again sometime.
We can do it again anytime, especially because you're very accommodating and the hardest thing, not the hardest thing, but sometimes it's like, yeah, would you be on my podcast? Like, sure. Like, okay, we need to record it at 10 o'clock your time. And I'm like, that's a little problematic or whatever, but I'd love to do it. I'd love to come back on. I'd love to answer all your questions. I think I give you credit. You're very thoughtful in the way you put this together, in the question, the way you go about it. You're asking questions that are interesting, not like, hey, tell me about your brand. Tell me,
how many cases can you sell?
Right. So,
and those are all important things, but you've likely answered that for somebody else already. And
I'm not really sure people care about it.
We've got one person that did say, hey, what's the distribution going to be like on Phoenix, on the Innkeeper's blend versus Phoenix blend? But like I said, somebody's probably covered it. And if not,
we're going to increase it by a little bit. And I think we're adding 4 or 5 additional markets. So, but that's, I get it. That's interesting. I don't mean that people don't care about it, but
I think they're specifically asking because it's like, can I get a bottle? Am I going to be able to get a bottle?
Yeah.
Am I going to be close by? And the guy that's asking actually is the one. So I live in Western Kentucky, in a state where you have distribution, but he lives somewhere else. And he was the one that enabled me to pick up a bottle of it. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Where is he?
He is in Maryland, maybe.
We are launching Maryland and DC in the spring with the Innkeeper's blend. We will be in both Maryland and DC.
Perfect. All right, like I said, I appreciate it. I don't want to steal any more of your time.
No, you're great. I'd love to do it again. We'll set it up. If you'll have me, you may just be saying that to be nice, and then after this, you're like delete or whatever, But
no, definitely not the case. The reason why I even started podcasting was to be able to have interesting conversations with people. I sort of put myself in the box for a year and said, for a year, I'm going to sit in a room by myself. I'm going to record. So make sure it's not one of these like ideas that I want to do this thing, and then I get 6 months in, and then I'm like, I'm over it. Before I start taking other people's time. So I did it. When I hit that 1 year mark, it was like, all right, now who wants to talk to me? And luckily a lot of people have said yes, and I'll talk to anybody.
Well, you do a great job. You do a great job. Absolutely, man.
Thank you
Well,
so much.
thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it. It's an honor. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for tuning in for this offering of the Embellish podcast. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you have to be consuming this on. Hit me up on social media on Instagram or Twitter using the EmbellisPod handle. You can follow, you can keep up with what's going on here. I can also be found at www.embellishpod.com. All of my links, accounts, contact details, and so forth. I'll be back again next week. Actually, I'll be back again on Sunday. I'm going to have an interview with David Jennings of Wild Turkey / Rare Bird infamy. We'll have a good, fun conversation and see what's going on with that. So till then, cheers and thanks for hanging out.